Sterling Heights Public Library. My name is Brent, and today we're making pie crust. Come on down. So, the ingredients for this are very basic, very simple. You've heard the phrase easy as pie? Well, this is pie crust. So we're going to start out with some all-purpose flour, some shortening, some salt, and some cold water. I got a couple of ice cubes floating in this. So we'll do the measurements and the procedure here in just a second, and yes, we are going to make a pie. So we're going to start out with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Don't use bread flour, don't use cake flour. So this is baking, so we are going to be precise in our measurements. Fill the cup, scrape it off, level it off, add it to the bowl. Do it again. There it is in there. So we're going to mix our dry ingredients before we do anything else. So we've got 2 cups of flour, half a teaspoon of salt. This is a pastry blender. Just mix that in there. Now, you can get this stuff in canisters and just measure it with a cup. You can also get it in sticks. It has the measurements right on it. So, this one here, we're going to use 2/3 of a cup of shortening. So we'll cut right down through that. Butter comes the same way. We're going to unwrap it, cut it into pieces, add it in here. And then we're going to cut that in with the pastry blender. You can do this in a food processor, and I often do. But I wanted to show you how to do it this way. So we're going to use this to break up those pieces of shortening and just mix them right in with the flour. You want to leave some pieces in here. This is not going to be completely uniform. You can just clean that out of there like that. You are going to get your hands into this. Okay, so you can see that there's still some lumps and bumps in there. And then we're going to start adding our water. So, measurements for the water are not going to be exact because flour absorbs a certain amount of humidity from the air, and it can vary as to how much water you're going to need depending on the flour and sometimes weather conditions. So we're going to add about 6 tablespoons of cold water. We might need a little bit more than that. So there's 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then use this to kind of work that in there a little bit until it starts getting sticky. We want this to just hold together. We do not want to overwork pie dough. This is not bread dough where you're trying to develop stretchiness. We do not want stretchiness or toughness in this. The whole point of pie dough is that it should be tender and flaky. The Brits call this short crust. You can see how that kind of comes together into this shaggy looking mix like this. And then let's see if it holds together. Yeah, it doesn't quite hold together yet, so I'm going to need a little bit more of that water. So let's put 1 more tablespoon in there. Don't dump it all in one spot either, kind of spread it around a little bit. That's coming together better. Okay, so let me get everything out of that pastry blender, get it all formed together into a ball, and then we're going to set this aside for a little while to let it rest. So for our filling today, we are going to be doing apple. So I've got about 6 cups of peeled, cored, and sliced apples here. I've got half a cup of sugar. This is brown sugar, white sugar, up to you. You can use, up to 3/4 of a cup, depending on how sweet you like it, but I like it a little bit less sweet. I'm going to add about a teaspoon of cinnamon and about a tablespoon of that all-purpose flour. This is going to help thicken things. We're going to cook this filling together, and in order to help keep the apples from turning brown, I've got a little bit of lemon too, a little bit of fresh lemon juice here. I'm going to add about, it's going to be about a tablespoon. And we'll just put that right in there and stir everything together. We'll take it over to the stove and cook it. So I'm going to go ahead and cook this apple filling. A lot of people don't bother to do this beforehand, but I've had some problems in the past myself with getting things properly cooked and thickened inside the pie. So I do this part first a lot of times. I'm just going to put this over medium heat in a large saucepan and stir it occasionally until it comes together, the apples soften, and the flour starts to thicken things. You can see that those apples have cooked down a little bit. They've collapsed a little, they've softened a bit. We're not cooking them to mush. The flour has had a chance to activate. That happens once you bring things up to a boil. So you don't want your filling to be too loose. We've all probably at some point had a wet pie. You don't really want a wet pie. Another thing you can do, and you don't have to do this, but I sometimes like to add a little handful of dried fruit. In this case, we're doing raisins to this. This is going to help to absorb any of that excess moisture, and they add a nice little touch of additional flavor and texture to the filling of the pie. So those will absorb some of that extra juice. We're going to let this cool a bit. So our pie crust has been chilling for probably about an hour and a half, and it's nice and cold, and it's fully hydrated now, so it's no longer at all crumbly. We're going to cut that in just about half. I do about slightly more on one side than the other, and that's because your bottom crust needs to be slightly larger than your top crust. So put that on a piece of wax paper, and this recipe is for a 9-inch pie dish. So we're going to use wax paper is 12 inches. We need to get this to about 12 inches round. So we'll put a second piece of wax paper on top, rolling pin. We're going to use that to work that out into about a 12-inch round. And this not only keeps the dough off of your countertop, which keeps things a little bit cleaner, but makes it a little easier to handle. So that's pretty round, and I'll just check that with our pie plate. Yes, that should work quite nicely. First piece of paper off. Flip that upside down, and then peel the wax paper off of the crust. Just kind of form that to the pie plate. Should overlap the edge a little bit, but not by a lot. Okay, and if you've got a spot that's a little bit light, you can add a little bit of dough from one spot to another and just kind of press it together. So we've got our bottom crust in the pan. I've got the filling here, which is not cold but has cooled significantly from where it was earlier. And I know 6 cups of apples sounds like a lot of apples, but you'll see that it really works out to fill that plate just about right. We don't have a lot of extra airspace in there. sure we got all of our seasoning in there. I'm going to take a moment to roll out the top crust and then we'll put it together. So I've got the top crust rolled out as well, and we're going to go ahead and just put that right over the top, and then peel that wax paper right off of that one as well. And then we can start crimping our edges together. Kind of roll those up over a little bit and pinch them together. There's different techniques you can use for this. Depends on how decorative you want to make it. Just kind of rolling and pinching right now, and I'll do a little crimping here in a moment. And then you can take your fingers and go around to do a little bit of a pleat. This not only seals the edge, but gives it a little bit of a border in case anything bubbles up out of the pie. You don't really want pie filling all over your inside of your oven. It's very sticky. Now, you have to make sure that if you are baking a double crust pie that you cut some vent holes in the top so that the steam does not cause your pie to blow up. So I got a paring knife here. You can make these decorative however you want, but I like to do about 8 of them in a little bit of a star pattern here. They also make nice guides as to where you're going to cut your pie in the end. Make sure that they're opened up a little bit so that the steam can escape. And I've got my oven preheated to 375 right now. That's going to go in for about 50 minutes, and we're going to check it from there. So there's our pie. We're going in the oven. So after 50 minutes, we check this thing. It's got nice color on it. You can see there's a little bit of bubbling around the edge here. Now, if you're at all concerned about any kind of overflow coming out of your pie and you don't want it all over your oven, put a sheet pan underneath this when you put it in the oven. That will help prevent this. So we're not worried about whether the apples are cooked or not, or whether the thickening is set, because we did that cooked pie filling first. So we're going to let this cool for probably a good hour and a half, 2 hours. We don't want this thing to be hot while we still try and cut into it. We want it to be maybe room temperature to a little bit warm. Now the true test of a pie, of course, is cutting into it and getting a piece. So let's check this bad boy and see how we did. One of the nice things about using the glass pie plate is that you don't have to worry about scratching up the bottom of it like you do with a metal pan. You shouldn't need a sharp knife for this. The crust should be tender enough to do with a butter knife. Let's angle that first one out of there and see how we did. Ooh, nice. So we got good consistency here. There's not stuff running all over the place. Those raisins help with that. Don't think for a second that just because we made an apple pie today, that the only thing you can do with pie crust is dessert, because this here is a really nice little tool to have in your kit. You can make pot pie with this crust. You can make quiche, any number of different things. Useful thing to have. Pie, give it a try.